That base is a fundamentalist evangelical religious base. They see things in a religious, spiritual warfare, cosmic warfare kind of thing. And they believe Trump has been anointed by God to do God's bidding.
The critical component to mind control. Being made over to be clones of the person who's at the top of the pyramid. Interested in this subject because of my own cult involvement. I was recruited in 1974 into a front group of the Moonies.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast, Cults, Culture, and Coercion. And I have with me a distinguished guest, a repeat. James Scaminaci III is an expert on psychological warfare, and I've had the pleasure to know him for a number of years, and I've interviewed him twice before. So I would encourage you to go to my Substack and check out previous interviews. The first interview was regarding when I was researching the cult of Trump, and I learned about fourth generation psychological warfare, of which James is an expert on this topic, having done his doctoral work at Stanford on political sociology on this topic. And then, James, we did a follow-up a few weeks after the January 6th violent coup, where you said, Steve, this was a military operation. The mob was a distraction. So we did that one, and you nailed that. And it's been a while since we've talked, and so much is going on now in 2025. But before we dive in with you, I just want to say, not only do you have a PhD in political sociology from Stanford, but you're a former U.S. Naval Intelligence Officer, specializing in Soviet Russia Northern Fleet, a senior civilian intelligence analyst at the European Command's Joint Analysis Center. I could go on and on. You know your stuff. You understand psychological warfare. So I want you, my listeners have been hearing me say for a long time, where in it's World War III, it's psychological warfare through media. But I really want you to help unpack things from a military intelligence perspective. So welcome to my podcast, James Scaminaci III.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to be back.
Yeah, and you were saying just before we started recording that you were reviewing some of your notes for today, and that back in 1962, they were identifying psychological warfare as a really important dimension. So I'm pitching you a softball, wherever you want to go. I mean, I want you for sure to explain fourth generation psychological warfare and William Lind and all of that too. But you start where you would like, please.
Well, yeah, it's a big topic, and it's a layered topic. But let's start off with something really basic before we get into fourth generation warfare. Let's just start off with something basic. I did my PhD at Stanford, and Marty Lipset was the chairman of my dissertation committee.
Okay.
And Gabriel Alman, who was an expert in civic society, was also on my dissertation committee. So Marty Lipset wrote a book in 1962, and he goes, so what's the basis of having a stable democracy? Because right now, we're not in a stable democracy. So What is the basis of a stable democracy? And he meant that it was stable, but it's not without contradictions. It's not without conflict. It's not without tensions. So he said, one, the government's effective, right? It performs well. It does its basic functions. It protects the people. It gets the economy moving, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody knows what that is. But then he said, the second source of stability is the legitimacy of the political system. And by that, he meant that people think that the existing institutions are appropriate for the society. That's one aspect. And then the second aspect is that your values are consistent with the values of the political system.
Mm.
Okay? So that makes for a stable democracy. But obviously, values can be in tension and conflict. And now we are in an actual moral conflict. Or as some on the religious right or Christian right would say, they are in a cosmic warfare, or they are in a spiritual warfare. So what I'm trying to do, just allude to it, is from the 1960s talking about a conflict of values threatens the legitimacy of the system, to today, we are in a crisis of legitimacy because we have a fourth generation warfare movement, and I'll explain that, that has been undermining the legitimacy of the United States since at least the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not a new problem. It evolves over time. The language changes, the means of communication change from the fax machine to memes on the internet. But it's still psychological warfare. And it's still getting in your mind and undermining the legitimacy of the United States government.
Mm-hmm.
It's not new.
Right. And when I wrote The Cult of Trump, I went back to Bernays and his 1928 book, Propaganda, and how Goebbels wanted to hire him to help with the Nazis, right? And he said things like, you don't sell the product, you sell the need for the product, and the big lie repeating over and over again, the louder and the more times you say it, people start accepting. And principles that we've long understood work with the frail human mind. Yeah.
And so this will lead back into your excellent book on the cult of Trump, right? So here's, again, Marty Lipset's writing in, I think this was in 1962, I think. And he says, or it might have been 1970, but he says, there are parties of total integration, right? And now we're looking at the Republican Party in like 1970, okay? And he's looking at the John Birch Society movement, with the history of going back to the McCarthy movement. And he goes, on the left and the right, whether it's fascism or communism, there are parties of total integration. And what does he mean by that? So he says, there's a struggle between divine or historical truth, and the other side is one that has fundamental error. So what he's saying is that divine truth is a religious movement, and historical truth would have been something like the Communist Party with historical materialism or dialectical materialism, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's in 1970. He sees these parties of total integration. If we translate it now to what we see, we actually have what was it? Jürgenmeister had talked about cosmic warfare, right? What we have now with the vice president talking, I think, but certainly Marjorie Taylor Greene and other people talking about, they're in a spiritual warfare battle.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the cult of Trump, because the parties of total integration is you have to take your followers and not allow them to be cross-pressured, right? To have other alternative sources of information, or to say, I'm a farmer and I have farming interests, So you have to isolate them psychologically, mentally, in an information space, which leads to what Trump has created and the Christian right has created is the cult of Trump. But this is all, we could see it in the 1960s and early 1970s and just developing all the way through the decades until now. We have a full-blown crisis of legitimacy.
Right.
And the president of the United States is leading it.
Right. exactly. And this nonsense about we live in a post-truth world or we have alternative facts. And I do want you to get back to Lynn's 1980 piece on fourth generation warfare, the attack on
Yeah.
experts in science and democratic institutions.
Well, I just want to lay the foundation that when we get to Lind, they're doing Lind and Weyrich and the Christian right now are doing things that Hofstadter, Daniel Bell, Seymour Lipset all saw coming in the 60s and 70s. There wasn't the institutional mechanism to pull it off. There wasn't the communications network to pull it off, but they could see it coming. Okay?
Right.
So let's jump ahead to Hofstadter. He writes this very important book that people don't read or ignore, and that's Anti-Intellectualism in American Life.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his prime examples is a Christian that is basically almost revered across the political spectrum. Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives don't have a bad thing to say about Billy Graham.
Mm.
But Hofstadter, in his book, Anti-Intellectualism, says, Billy Graham is a prime example of this. And the prime example he pulls out is that Billy Graham says, to the effect, we have replaced the Bible, right, with science and reason and the working power of government. This is Billy Graham, respected guy, always in the White House with Nixon, shaking hands with Reagan, that blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And he says the Bible supersedes science, reason, and the working power of government. Mm-hmm. And we have that today on steroids.
Right.
So what Hofstadter suggested, or not suggested, what Hofstadter wrote in his book from multiple observations, of course, was that this war against intellectuals and experts was against what Graham called the culture of the mind. But he said, here's academia and government. This is where experts live, all right? In academia and in government. They know how the CIA is supposed to do intelligence. They know how the Department of Defense is supposed to do defense. They know how agriculture department is supposed to do agriculture. And so they have status in society, and they have power in society. And the Billy Graham and all those preachers, those evangelical fundamentalist preachers, they did not like the fact that the evangelicals were being marginalized and small businessmen were being marginalized and small politicians were being marginalized by expertise.
Mm-hmm.
This is in 1962 that Hofstadter writes this. What do we have today? We have a movement with Trump and the vice president and any number of Republicans that you can pick at random talking about the deep state. It's a hostility to expertise, as Tom Nichols wrote in his book, The Death of Expertise. But we've seen this coming. It's now metastasized into a full-blown cancer on the body politic.
Right. Yeah, because they think, if you're a literalist, the Earth is 6,000 years old. So anyone who says it's 4 billion years old, is satanic for that idea. Yeah. And when 98% of all climate scientists say we're warming the planet, it's going to destroy ecosystems, millions will die. The fossil fuel corporations funding the Christian right want to say, no, this is disinformation. There's no problem. Keep fracking and doing fossil fuels forever.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's money rationales too behind this.
So I've alluded to what's happened in the past in the 60s and 70s to what's happening now.
Yeah.
So let me jump into fourth generation warfare.
Please.
Because I want to put that on the table and then go back and forth with other things that we see. So the audience, I just want you to understand that this will sound simple, but it's actually a very complex strategy. A very complex strategy.
Okay.
So there were two people involved in this strategy. One was John Boyd, who was blameless. All right, let me just put that out there. Totally blameless. And then there's William Lind, who was in the circle of military academics who were studying maneuver warfare. And they did an excellent job, and Lind is an expert on maneuver warfare, in moving the U.S. Marine Corps from what its doctrine was into maneuver. And John Boyd was an absolute brilliant American strategist, probably the top strategist in the United States. And he was instrumental, of course, in getting the military to get into maneuver warfare, which was our air-land battle. And just to put it simply, during the Cold War, I was in the Army at the time. We were facing Soviet armies, not just divisions, Soviet armies stacked on top of each other, preceded by Warsaw Pact armies stacked on top of each other. And they were all going to get in their tanks, and they were going to rumble across the Fulda Gap, and they were going to run right on into U.S. Army troops, along with our NATO allies. Right? And they could just run us over. They had so many of them. All right, this is not even a joke. So the Army thought long and hard and said, well, what are we going to do? And they come up with air-land battle, which is maneuver. And that is shoot and scoot, fight fast, fight hard, keep moving. Don't, just hit the enemy and then move, and then hit the enemy and then move, then hit the enemy and move. Okay. So Boyd is this master of strategy, of maneuver warfare, of moving fast and hitting targets. Now, he and William Lind are in the same sort of planetary thing in the Department of Defense and in Congress. In fact, Lind was working for Gary Hart, a Democrat, on the Senate Armed Services Committee. So he has some pull. And Boyd comes up with the idea of that when you look at conflict, it's more than just the levels of conflict like the normal people look at it, like tactical level, operational level, strategic level. He goes, no. Conflict is at the physical level, right? Where you're duking it out. But it's also at the mental level, how you perceive reality, right. How strong you are mentally. And it's at the moral level, your will to fight, your will to resist. And he goes, and what you have to do in maneuver warfare is you have to magnify menace, uncertainty, and mistrust, right? Create it, exploit it, magnify it, so that your opponent feels fear, anxiety, and alienation. And whether you're talking about an army or a society, the moral bonds that have a organic entity exist become frayed, start coming apart. This internal friction, what political scientists would say is polarization.
Right. So
what do we have now? We have a Christian right that has been working since the 1950s to exploit menace, uncertainty, anxiety, create fear, and dissolve the moral bonds that keep us together. All right. This is a sophisticated strategy.
Yep.
This is not political science 101 that you get at the universities. This is how do you take apart an opponent, whether it's a military or a society? How do you take them apart? All right. So William Lind is privy to this because he's listened to the lectures of John Boyd. He knows all the John Boyd guys in the Pentagon. And while he's writing his first paper on fourth generation warfare, it includes one of the guys who was working with John Boyd And this guy is talking to John Boyd on almost a daily basis about them writing this paper. Now, John Boyd's blameless on this. So I don't want anybody to jump on me and say, oh, you're blaming John. I'm not blaming John Boyd for anything. So William Lynn writes this paper, Fourth Generation Warfare. And what is it basically? He says, Fourth Generation Warfare is a non-state actor versus a central state actor. Okay, it could be a movement versus a federal government or any kind of government. He goes, what's it based on? It's ideas. So you could have the ideas of race. You can have the ideas of class. You can have the ideas of religion. Okay? Now, obviously, if class, you could be a Marxist. You could be a fascist. Race, you could be a white supremacist. Religion, you could be a Christian nationalist.
Right.
Now, what's the object of this fourth generation warfare? The object is two. There's two objects. The first object is to get you to transfer your loyalty from the central government or the political order to this movement. Okay? Now, how many times have you read or heard people say, I'm a Christian first, I'm a Republican second, and I'm an American third? Or maybe an American comes second and Republican third. But always they go, they've transferred their loyalty. They're Christian first.
Yeah.
Or you've heard people say, well, I'm a Muslim first. They've transferred their loyalty to a religious movement.
Right.
Okay. They believe that whatever government they're dealing with is illegitimate, doesn't command their values, doesn't command their respect.
Right.
So what's the object of fourth generation warfare? Besides transferring your loyalty, it is to undermine the legitimacy of the state. And you can do that in a variety of ways. But it's a moral conflict because remember, Marty said legitimacy is your values, your moral values coincide with the values of the political system. So this is a moral conflict. Now, Lynn doesn't actually say that it's a moral conflict, but it is a moral conflict because he's hiding a lot of what's going on.
Right.
And Lynn also says that you could have, terrorism, but it's not the main thing to have terrorism. Terrorism is good because it energizes the political system. They have to deal with it. You have to start looking for, who radicalized who and who did what to whom and who's responsible and what's the role of Fox News, blah, blah, blah. So terrorism's okay.
Right.
It's unfortunate. It's tragic, but it's okay. But it's not the main thing. The main thing is what Lynn writes, and that is manipulation of your mind. Now, they put it that he wrote this in the late 1980s. Fox News hadn't even started, but so they just mentioned the manipulation of moving images.
Right.
But
and if I can just interrupt for a second, when did Paul Weyrich pair up with William Lynch? Because I know that they connected, and Paul Weyrich is a strategist of the Christian right.
Right. They pair up sometime in the mid-1980s. I can't specify this.
That's what I thought. And am I correct, before I let you go on, that Michael Flynn and his person Waldron were doing fourth generation psychological warfare in other countries while they were Americans? No.
I'm
in error.
No, it's that they're doing psychological operations, but they're not doing fourth generation warfare because fourth generation warfare is a non-state actor and we're a state actor.
Interesting.
We're a state actor. We're trying to manipulate another state. But
couldn't we have like proxy groups that appear to be small, generic movements that are going against other state actors?
You could.
Yeah. Anyway.
I mean, when we're involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, I mean, it's us. I mean, we're the ones doing the psychological operations.
Okay.
Now, Flynn's doing fourth generation warfare inside the United States. of the Christian right. There's no doubt about that.
And then he says there's no doubt about that. He's in bed with the Moonies, the sons of some young moon right now.
Yeah.
But please continue. This is fascinating.
So the thing of it is they want to manipulate images, movies, media, news for psychological operations to undermine the legitimacy of the federal government and then transfer your loyalty. Once you're convinced that it's illegitimate, transfer your loyalties to the Christian right. Okay? Or if it was a Marxist group, it would be transfer your loyalties to the Communist Party or to the white power movement, whichever it is. And that happens as well.
Right.
So that's the fundamentals of fourth generation warfare. Mm-hmm. Now, what you see is that you bring up Paul Weyrich as the architect of the Christian right. And so Weyrich creates the Heritage Foundation, which everybody thinks is a secular group. It's not secular. It's not secular. It has a secular face, and all the PhDs are secular. But there's a thing called donors trust, and donors trust is a blind trust. So you're a billionaire, and you give your $10 million to donors trust, and you go, I want it to go to this organization or that organization, but my name, you don't see my name. Okay.
Right. We know that with the Council for National Policy is one of those right-wing think tanks like that.
Donors Trust says, okay, we'll give money to an organization, but not just any organization. This organization has to believe in like a literal Bible. It has to believe in, certain Christian tenets.
Anti-gay, anti-women's rights.
Anti-abortion, anti-women's rights, blah, 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 blah. All these cultural war issues, which of course have a secular face. But the Heritage Foundation gets money from the Donors Trust, which is set up to support Christian worldview, Christian values, which are in opposition to the legitimacy of the U.S. government.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so Weyrich he creates the Heritage Foundation. He creates the Free Congress Foundation. He's instrumental in bringing about the moral majority. He's instrumental in bringing about a number of other organizations, along with Howard Phillips, who creates the Constitution Party, along with Richard Viguerie, who does the mass mailings.
Yep. So, I know Viguerie from my Mooney days. He was involved.
I mean, it's not really well known, but I actually met Weyrich and William Lind back in my days in Washington, D.C. I was working for Jack Wheeler. I just graduated from my PhD, and I was a liberal. I worked for Marty Lipset. I was a conservative kind of Democrat, liberal kind of Democrat, but I believe in a strong defense. I mean, so I worked for Jack Wheeler. He was supporting the Mujahideen. That was a bipartisan support from Democrats. I mean, Joe Wilson's war. Joe Wilson was a Democrat from Texas supporting the Mujahideen. So to me, it was like no big deal. Okay?
Mujahideen was Afghanistan, correct?
Yeah, but it was the Northern Alliance, right? Yeah. A different part of Afghanistan. So Jack Wheeler hires me and says, okay, I want you to go to Washington, D.C. and represent my foundation and me, which is just him, right? Just represent him because he doesn't want to travel.
Mm-hmm.
So I go, okay, I have no idea what I'm getting into. Just none. I mean, I've heard of the moral majority, but it's like, these guys are like lunatics.
So Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson.
I've heard of the Christian right, but I was writing my PhD on the Euro missile crisis.
Right.
I'm not concentrating on American politics. I could care less. I get to Washington, D.C., and I'm in meetings with Paul Weyrich and Howard Phillips and William Lind, and they're like, rabidly for the Strategic Defense Initiative. I just came out of Stanford University. I used to go to the weekly lunch for the Stanford Arms Control, and nuclear physicists and strategists were telling us strategic defense is ridiculous. It's stupid. It'll never work. So I'm in these meetings going, oh, my God, where am I?
Yeah, I bet.
So that's a little known fact. I mean, it'll probably come back and bite me, but it's a little known fact. So I met these guys, and they were like hardcore dudes. I mean, just really, they ran these meetings. I mean, I'd seen left-wing meetings. I wasn't a left-winger, but I'd seen left-wing meetings because I had been in that milieu, and I'd seen how these meetings run, and he ran it like a Leninist. I mean, he stated a position, and that was the position. It was like no opposition.
Yeah. Yeah.
They, Howard Phillips and Richard Viguerie and all these guys, they'd already agreed on what the position was. And it was just, here's the position. Let's take a vote. Who's in favor?
Rubber stamp it. And I believe Lind met with Trump in the first time in the White House.
The first, I know during the first campaign, he met with Trump. Gave him a copy of his book. Probably talked. And if you see, Trump is doing exactly fourth generation warfare. I mean, you know it better than I do, of creating a sense of menace, of creating anxiety, of creating uncertainty. I mean, he's a master of pulling this off, creating fear.
Right. But anxiety. I want to push back and challenge, is Trump a genius, or is he being given talking points by Susan Wiles, by Russia and other people? Because I don't think he read William Lind's book and is an intellectual in any way.
No, I think Trump has some smart people around him. Mm-hmm. Just like every president has some smart people around him who really know how to move the levers of government. Stephen Miller, Voight, all these other guys. They know how to make the government work for their favor. Trump,
dismantle the government.
And Trump he probably has instincts, gut feelings about what he wants to do. He's a thug. I mean, he comes out of this. Real estate's probably not an easy industry to maneuver in, right? So his first lawyer was Roy Cohn.
You're right.
So he understands that politics is just a dirty business. It's Richard Nixon played by the rules, and Trump figured out, I really don't have to play by the rules. I can make the rules. So I think he has instincts. He certainly has some smarts, some street smarts, some business savvy. Even if he goes bankrupt, he probably knows how deals work, how you can maneuver people, how you can bluff people, how you can do all sorts of things. And what he doesn't know, he has smart people that can do it.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we know that he had at least 6 bankruptcies. We know Mark Burnett was involved with the Christian right and created an illusion that he was a successful businessman.
But look at Trump. He figures out, I don't have to resign. Every other president would have resigned for something or other. But he saw Clinton gut it out on the Monica Lewinsky thing and beat the rap.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets caught with something much, much worse. And he goes, I ain't resigning. Try to convict me. And he basically tells the Republicans in the House and the Senate, if you convict me, I got the mob that's going to come after you.
Yeah, mob is a good word. Yeah.
I've got the mob that can come after you. And they're scared of the base. And let's go back.
Who's scared of the base?
The Republican Party, the official members in the House and the Senate, in the local.
Right, but that assumes Trump can control the base to still have allegiance to him, despite Epstein and everything else.
There are probably fissures and probably some fractions, but that base is a fundamentalist evangelical religious base. Mm-hmm. They see things in a religious, spiritual warfare, cosmic warfare kind of thing. And they believe Trump has been anointed by God to do God's bidding.
That's the cult of Trump thesis.
Right.
That's what I wrote about.
So if you're a Republican and now you want to stand up and really break with Trump, you're breaking with God. You're breaking with the base. And you're breaking with a base that's armed.
Yeah, you're breaking with God with air quotes.
Oh, yeah,
because
yeah.
I want people to understand that, words matter.
Yeah.
And there are many very religious Christians who think he's the Antichrist, to use a term Peter Thiel is talking about now and trying to rewire what the meaning of the Antichrist is in a religious sense, because it really is a threat. If one looks at Donald Trump, he is a deceiver. He is a pedophile and bad actor.
You have a guy in president with all the power of the presidency, and he's showing. The founders tried to frame the presidency so that there was a Supreme Court that could look over the legality of things. There was a House and Senate that could have its own sources of institutional power, the power of the purse, the power to impeach, the power to convict. And Trump has just said, I control you guys. I own all you guys. You don't have any power over me.
Yeah.
And very few people really want to stand up and take him on. Mitch McConnell didn't.
Right.
McConnell had 2 chances to convict this guy in the Senate.
Yep.
And just blinked because he knew there's a bullet with your name on it.
Mitt Romney voted 1 count. And the Mormon Church, which is a huge part of his base of so-called Christian belief system, which they're not, but they, think they are. They turned on him, and he was a GOP presidential candidate. I was shocked.
Yeah. Go back to the 1980s. I don't know the book. I mean, I read the book, but I don't remember the authors. But there were 2 communication professors, and they studied all of Richard Viguery's mail that he sent out, right? And they looked at the messages, and they came to the conclusion that this was a totalitarian movement that was pushing a muscular Jesus, an armed muscular Jesus, and it was a threat to democracy. And this is in 1980. Reagan hadn't even been elected yet. The moral majority was just off on its first feet, and they saw this threat, and this threat has just nothing but grown.
Yeah,
and Hofstadter in the 1960s, saw that. Who could be attracted to the paranoid style, if you want to call it that? He said was these fundamentalists in the heartland of America, right? And you could expand it now to the heartland of America to suburban America, right? And these people can be motivated by ethnic prejudice. They can be motivated by isolationism, by classical liberal economics. But he also wrote in the 1960s that fundamentalism and the revolt against modernity is not a minor part of these sentiments.
Right. Definitely.
And this has only grown. So Trump, when you see those memes where Trump is some muscular, Trump is in physical reality, what is
obese?
He? 79 years old, obese, flabby, probably couldn't break a pencil. He's this muscular guy with an M16, wearing a crown, looking like sitting with Jesus. They've made him out to be this muscular president, and he just acts the part now.
Yeah. Well, that's something I've learned, James, over the decades of my working with so many different cult leaders, is what is obviously now to me just followers getting indoctrinated, where they project perfection onto the guru, onto the Messiah. I couldn't imagine Moon anything but the greatest man in human history. So when he walked by me in a leadership meeting and farted and it smelled really bad, I was not allowed to think human thoughts about, wow, he cut a really smelly one. He could have apologized. Like I had to stop any negative thoughts because it was a demon trying to test me. Seriously, it is. But the point is people will project onto the other, especially if they have a need to do so. And when you have economic uncertainty, political uncertainty, etc., people's stop thinking critically and analytically, and they tend to react more emotionally. And their developmental status goes more down to childhood. Like, tell me, Daddy, what to do. You say you're going to protect me. And it's the opposite of people using their own minds.
Yeah, but who was the professor? Is it Lutkoff? Who wrote like 90% of thinking is emotional. You come to an emotional decision. And then
I'm not sure. Damasio comes to mind, but for sure we're social beings and emotional beings who rationalize, and we are a lot more suggestible to the information that we're exposed to than we want to consciously admit. And people don't like to admit they've been conned or taken for duped. Or such. There is a certain point where I reached a tipping point where I realized Moon wasn't the Messiah and therefore wasn't the greatest man in history. And then once I allowed that thought, then the whole structure of my belief system crumbled because I had had so many disillusioning experiences that I didn't ever processed. And my hope is, because we have so many millions of former cult members in the United States, many of whom haven't done their homework to understand how they had been brainwashed. But my hope is that these folks will be sharing their stories to put on in the public sphere the fact that humans can be brainwashed to believe ridiculous things and do things against their own values, their own conscience. So there is a chance and a hope for people to come out and go, no, I don't want to follow Trump anymore. And there are fissures and fractures that exist, which the administration is doing everything possible to distract us from those and cement wherever they can cement. But it feels dire at the moment to me and other analysts.
Well,
what do you think, James? You're the expert on this stuff.
A lot of my friends, when I communicate with them, they're like, politics is depressing, and I tell them politics is depressing. And I go, I find my outlet in watching sports.
Yeah.
And I'm not the most hopeful guy. I really am not. I want to be. When we talk about fourth generation warfare and moral conflict, and you have fear and anxiety and alienation, we need harmony and trust. You need to find the moral values that give you strength. You need to have you find the moral courage to overcome your fear. That you have to do. And even John Boyd said, whatever it is that gives you that. If it's reading comic books, that gives you moral courage, great. If it's reading the Bible and getting moral courage, great. Whatever it is that gives you the moral values that you can overcome menace and fear and anxiety and alienation, trust your fellow human beings, that's what you have to do. Now, for me, part of that is my first sort of like, because I come from a Catholic background, and arguing with the church for decades. Because the church is not democratic. I mean, if you look at the history of the church, it's not for democracy. Protestantism was for democracy. The Catholic Church was not for democracy. So it's the first steps towards looking at Judaism, which I don't want to get into, but it's the first steps towards finding something that has moral values that's lasted for thousands of years and that had given Jews courage to overcome monstrous persecutions over centuries. And to me, it's like, I got to take a look at that because there's something there that I haven't really looked at. So I want to look at that. I want to look at that really, really closely. But when I look at the political system and I look at the history of what's been going on, and starting in the 1950s, Hofstadter goes, listen, when Joe McCarthy stood up in the 1950s and he said, the president of the United States is a communist, and the president of the United States at that time was President Eisenhower, who had led the Allied troops to victory over Japan, that he's a communist. Richard Hofstadter goes, in just one sentence, he goes, McCarthy is calling into question the legitimacy of the entire political order. This is the 1950s. It's been going on the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, all the way up to today. And, when academicians, write about Hofstadter in the Atlantic or the New Republic or Harper's or wherever they're writing, they go to the paranoid style and they make fun of the conspiracism and whatever that's going on there. But Hofstadter, even in the paranoid style book, was talking about fundamentalism is the major driver of the right wing. And we have ignored that. QAnon, yes, is ridiculous. Is there a Democratic Party cabal of international pedophiles? No. But what was the purpose of the QAnon? It was to delegitimize the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party elites. It was stupid, but that was
a Psy-Ops. Yeah, that
was the purpose. And then they had the Mickey Mouse, the Mickey Mouse mantra, or the Three Musketeers, right? The Three Musketeers was all for one and one for all. As I remember watching the thing.
Where we go one, we'll go all was the QAnon.
Where we go one, we go all is brilliant. And I wrote this. It is a brilliant way to give people who are discouraged. Hofstadter wrote that the right wing thinks that they're dispossessed, that they don't possess the government, they don't possess the country, that they're exiled in their own country. And here a movement comes along and goes, where we go one, we go all. We have the moral strength, the moral values, the moral courage to overcome these satanic agents.
Right.
And liberals just missed it, just completely missed it.
Agreed. And that's where the Epstein files are really coming back to haunt the right wing because, there were Democrats who were having sex with underage girls, but a whole lot of Republicans, including best friend of Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump.
And I want to say for the record, the absolute record, I want the Epstein files to come out. And I don't care which Democrat and which Republican is in there having raped a young girl. I want them all exposed and all prosecuted. And I don't care who it is. It matters to me not one whit. Whereas the Republicans, they want to protect the Republicans. They only want Democrats to be prosecuted.
Right. So when we get in, because trafficking is one of my areas, I've spent a lot of time helping victims and using my models. There are statute of limitations that make it hard to prosecute people years later, etc. But just to reveal it and to reveal that Donald Trump isn't Jesus's agent and isn't God's agent, but fundamentally is a deceiver and is an antichrist-like figure to all of those right-wing Christians to realize that we're following the wrong person. That's my hope.
Yeah, that's my hope too. But, the irony of it is, of course, the QAnon thing is that the actual international pedophile ring was run by the Republican Party.
Well, wasn't it also Russia that was using underage girls to do compromat? Wasn't it also, intelligence
Probably.
agencies, including Mossad and the CIA? Didn't they use
There has
women?
to be, there has to be an intelligence agency somewhere in this.
I think it's Russia for sure, from what I understood from Craig Unger's book, American Compromat, and my interview with Yuri Shvets, who's a former KGB official, who said, oh, yes, we recruited Donald Trump in the 80s and named the place in New York City and etc. He said it was standard operating procedure to recruit American businessmen, bring them to Moscow and set them up and videotape them.
That's another side of the intelligence world that I was not on, the operational side of it. I was on the analytical side of it, right? But I did talk to a friend of mine who was on the operational side.
Mm.
And I just asked him, I said, what do you think? And if I can remember correctly, it was that an Epstein wouldn't necessarily be their asset. Let's say it's Russia or Mossad or CIA, whatever. He wouldn't necessarily be the asset. But they would be able to gather clues, right? Maybe through Trump, maybe through somebody else who's close to Epstein, about, you ought to look at this guy. You ought to look at that guy. So they're not necessarily running Epstein. They're not necessarily getting the videos of Epstein, but they're getting information of, oh yeah, look at this deal, look at that deal, look at this guy, look at this travel. And that's all they need.
Yeah, but it seems Epstein was getting a whole lot of money from somewhere. And was it from billionaires who didn't want the fact that they were having sex, or was it something else? I don't know.
I have absolutely no idea where he got it. He could have been very good at business. He could have been blackmailing people, but he could have been good at business. He just could have. It seemed like some of the things he was pulling off were ahead of his time, that he was seeing some things. Not everything is a conspiracy. Not everything is blackmail.
Well, not everything certainly is a conspiracy theory, but I definitely believe there are such things as conspiracies.
I believe in conspiracies too.
Like the Council for National Policy is a for real think tank of the right wing, and for sure they put the founding editor of my cult's Washington Times, they put their person as the founding editor, James Whalen, in. And I met with him when he took that job, and I said, they're going to use you to create legitimacy and to dispense propaganda, to which he said, well, I'm not selling my house in Texas, and I'll keep my eyes open. A number of years later, he resigned, saying the KCIA is trying to make me, say things that aren't true. So he resigned and did a public interview about it, and the editorial page editor resigned as well. But the point is that when I was in the Moonies, there were clear indications the Moonies were coordinating. They were giving money to Jerry Falwell, even though Moon claimed that Jesus failed his mission. I always didn't make sense to me why Jerry Falwell would take money from a false messiah figure, except that he wanted the money, and there was another agenda there, which was a right-wing political one.
I can tell you, in the 2 years that I was in Washington, D.C., I think it was there for 87. I left by 89. Mm-hmm. So about a year that I was actually in that Weyrich kind of circle, watching things. And I can tell you for absolute fact that the Moonies really were running those guys because they were providing the money.
Yeah.
They were providing the money. And you know, that was, if you had an idea for something, you went to the Moonies to get money.
Right. So thank you for validating that. And because I was a whistleblower for the Congressional Subcommittee investigation, and I was friends with Lee Jae-han, who was the #2 South Korean embassy official who defected with the KCIA operations list for the U.S., and it named the Moonies. And then I read the investigation, all of the interviews, and the founder of the Korean CIA said he, quote, organized and utilized the Unification Church for use as a political tool. And then when I started talking to former CIA people, they were like, yeah, North Korea, we know, was brainwashing. They were solid. South Korea had 2 unsuccessful coups, and we needed to come up with something to stabilize South Korea. So we picked a proxy group to do brainwashing of South Korean dissidents, and it was the Moonies under the name Victory Over Communism. And the Moonies had licenses to build arms in South Korea that supposedly was going to help South Korea, but they got sent to other countries that the U.S. government wanted to fund. And then when Americans wanted to get out of the Vietnam War, they brought the Moonies to the campuses of the United States to try to combat them. And that's when I got recruited at Queens College in February of '74. So there's this whole like Cold War intelligence, side to things. And I've said this publicly, and I'll say it again. I was trained to die on command or kill on command, like a soldier for God. So it was even higher than for the U.S. government as a military person. I was doing God's will, and so I understand radicalization is possible with a liberal, intelligent person from a good, stable family. I got hacked.
Yeah. But, I'll put my sociological hat on, not intelligence hat. Put a sociological hat on. Look at Epstein. Look at Epstein. So Epstein's a pretty smart guy. And he has money. And he's running around with other pretty smart guys who also have a lot of money. And they probably have one thing in common, besides being smart and have a lot of money, is they like really, really underage girls, right? So they share that in common. That's like the water they swim in. Now, they all have ideas about how to make money, and Epstein doesn't have to threaten them with a video because they're all trying to make money. The fact that they're raping underage girls is immaterial to them. That's
they're objects for their pleasure.
That's just what they do for pleasure, you know. So, Epstein has this idea of like for a cryptocurrency or something that would lead to a cryptocurrency, right? And he finds some other billionaire and goes, yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea. Let's see how can we do this? And they start making money at it. And I think that's more the videotapes and the blackmail of using the videotapes. That comes from something else. That comes from an intelligence service that knows who's who.
Yeah, it's not Russian intelligence.
It could be Russian.
Okay.
It could
That's
be
my thesis. That's my theory.
Yeah, I mean, it could be Russian intelligence. But I'm just saying, Epstein doesn't have to blackmail some billionaire to get money. They're all in the business of making money. So can they come up with a good idea to make money?
Right. But also that they're smart enough to know that they have this thing that could get played if they get too oppositional.
Yeah, but they also probably know, Jeffrey, there's a limit to what you can do, how you can exploit this. I mean,
Yeah.
because if you exploit it, you say, well, here's a videotape of me with an underage girl. It's like, well, it's in your house.
Yeah. Right.
It's on your island.
Yeah.
So there's a limit to how you can do that. But if you're the Russian intelligence service, you don't care if it's in Jeffrey's house or on Jeffrey's island. You can exploit that to the max.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So as we're wrapping up, James Scaminaci III, expert on fourth generation psychological warfare, former Naval Intelligence. I want to thank you, James, so much. And a lot to think about. And I want to encourage people, they can go and read your papers on fourth generation psychological warfare. We've done 2 previous blogs together with links to those papers, I think. And if you have any new ones, send them along. And we'll say goodbye for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Stephen.
My pleasure.